Colorado is beautiful, so beautiful that sometimes you don't notice what it's hiding. Just beyond the mountain views and tourist roads, there are towns that have been left behind and they didn't vanish the way you'd expect. Today I'm taking you through 10 of the most abandoned places in Colorado, and the scary part is they didn't disappear for one simple reason. Some look like an old movie set with storefronts still standing, but the life inside has already gone dark. Some let you walk their streets, but only when the lake drops low enough. Some were born from pure ambition, then died the moment their lifeline got cut. And at number 1, you'll see a town that's still clearly there, almost fully visible, but separated from you by a reason that makes you instinctively lower your voice. Stay until the end. Number 10, Ludlow. If you're driving through southern Colorado on I-25, there's a stretch where the landscape feels wide open and almost too quiet. Then you take a small turn off the highway and you land in a place that doesn't look like a ghost town at first because there isn't a main street to gawk at. No row of collapsing storefronts. No cute abandoned saloon with a swinging door. Instead, the first thing that hits you is a big granite monument standing out in the open like it's the town center. And that's the weird part. How does a place feel this empty, yet still have something that looks like it was meant to be the heart of a community? This is Ludlow, and Ludlow is abandoned in a different way. It didn't just fade because the jobs dried up or the highway rerouted traffic. It froze. What happened here during the coal strike era, especially in 1914, turned this patch of ground into something people treat like a line you don't casually step over. Over time, it stopped being a town you rebuild and became a place you remember. Here's a detail that makes it sink in. The miners' union bought this site in 1916, and in 1918 they put up that monument using donated money from miners around the country. Think about that. Not a developer, not a city council trying to revive tourism. People who barely had extra cash still pooled it together to plant a permanent marker right here. That choice basically redefined the future of the location. It's like saying that this isn't just land anymore, this is a warning label. And when you walk closer, you notice something even stranger, a heavy metal hatch in the ground near the memorial. It's not flashy, it's not there for tourists to take cute photos. It feels practical, sealed, almost guarded. It's a physical reminder that this story isn't just words on a plaque. There are layers under your feet, and somebody decided those layers should stay protected, not turned into a theme park. The worse than you think moment with Ludlow is realizing that abandonment can be emotional, not just economic. The buildings didn't simply disappear. The community trust snapped, and the place never returned to normal life. Even decades later, it's been formally recognized and preserved, and as recently as the 2000s and 20s, there have been efforts and funding focused on protecting the site. So this isn't forgotten, it's intentionally left quiet. And that's the punchline. Ludlow doesn't feel abandoned because nobody remembers it. Ludlow feels abandoned because people remember it too clearly. Now, the next place on this list looks abandoned in a way you can spot from a distance, but the reason it fell apart is completely different. Number 9, Bonanza. If you hear the word Bonanza, you picture easy money, a lucky strike, prosperity, right? That's literally what the name means. But when you roll into Bonanza, Colorado, it feels like somebody left the lights on for a party that ended 100 years ago and never came back to clean up. You'll find it out in Saguache County, not far from Villa Grove. You get off US 285, take County Road LL 56 for about 14 miles, and the air changes. It's up around 9,500 feet, so it's dry, sharp, and quiet in that way mountain towns get when there's nothing moving. And then you hit this town on the map that barely feels like a town in real life. Main Street looks like a stage after the show, when the curtains drop and everybody disappears. Here's the part that sounds made up. In the first couple years, Bonanza popped so fast it pulled in something like 1,000 to 1,500 people. And back then, they practically measured growth by nightlife. The place bragged about having 36 saloons and 7 dance halls. Just imagine that. 36! In a place that today feels like you could count the residents on your hands without running out of fingers. Bonanza got hyped as the new Leadville. People chased that rumor hard. One story says even Ulysses S. Grant passed through in 1880, which tells you how loud the buzz was. When a former president shows up, that's not just a mining camp anymore, that's a headline. But here's where the worse than you think kicks in. Bonanza didn't simply die because the mine ran out. The real twist is that the hype was bigger than the reality. A lot of ore in the area wasn't the jackpot folks imagined, and making mining profitable turned out to be harder than the rumors. Even the Raleigh mine, the Big Hope, ran into long-term problems that didn't match the dream people sold each other. So the town kept breathing in cycles, up and down, hanging on until it started fading for real. By the mid-1930s, it was already dying out. Then came the final punch, a fire in 1937 that burned most of what was left of the business district. Some accounts put it at around 30 buildings. And if you think, okay, buildings burn, towns rebuild. Not here, because that business district wasn't just property. That was the last place people went to buy things, catch up, swap news, feel like life still existed. When that core burned, the town didn't just lose buildings, it lost its reason to stay a town. And the next year, 1938, the post office closed. That's the moment it feels official, like someone unplugged the whole place. Bonanza is what happens when a community is built on a rush of expectations instead of something stable. It's not just abandoned. It's the footprint of a dream that flared up, looked unstoppable, and then went quiet so completely you can hear the wind where the music used to be. Number 8. Iola. There's a kind of abandoned town that doesn't sit out in the open with broken windows and a leaning saloon sign. It's worse than that because you can't even see it most of the time. It's a town you can only visit when the lake is dying. This is Iola. Most of the year, Iola is just gone. It's under Blue Mesa Reservoir, and that's what makes it feel so unsettling. This place didn't fade out like a mining camp that ran out of luck. It didn't burn down like Bonanza, it got traded. The town was basically removed from the map so the region could have a massive reservoir and hydropower. Back in the early 1960s, Blue Mesa Dam was built as part of a much bigger water and power system. And that's the key thing to understand. This dam wasn't built for Iola. It was built for the machine, for the whole network. It works like a pressure valve for the region. Hold water here, release it later, generate power, control flows downstream. From the system's point of view, that's a success story. From a human point of view, it's cold. Because the system doesn't have feelings about a small town, it has targets. And Iola wasn't the only one. Little towns along the Gunnison River like Iola, Cibola, and Saponero existed up into the 1960s, and they were lost during the dam and reservoir project. National Park Service estimates say around 200 to 300 people were displaced. Imagine being told your whole town isn't dying, it's being scheduled. Like a calendar appointment, early 1960s, pack up, because the water is coming. NPS also describes how Iola was abandoned in that period, and how a lot of buildings were dismantled or even burned before the area flooded. And by the time the reservoir filled, news sources point to 1966 as the moment Iola was officially submerged. That's the part people don't expect. Not just moved, and not just relocated, submerged, like it was erased on purpose. But here's where it turns into a story you can't shake. When the lake level drops, Iola comes back. During really low water years, like the drought conditions that exposed parts of it in 2018, you can actually walk the outline of the old streets. You see the road traces, the foundation lines, like a blueprint printed in mud. Colorado Public Radio even described people finding the foundation of the old general store, the Big Little Store. That's already spooky, but the detail that hits you in the gut is the school flagpole base, because that concrete base still has initials carved into it. Kids, bored in class, proud, trying to leave a mark. And right beside those initials are local cattle brands, like the town stamped its identity into the same slab. One person came back and recognized the carved letters from their father and grandfather. And that's when Iola stops being a flooded town and becomes a family memory sitting at the bottom of a reservoir. That's the lesson Iola leaves behind. Abandonment isn't always decay. Sometimes it's a decision. Sometimes it's a trade. A town doesn't disappear because it failed, but because it was chosen to be sacrificed. And what rises back up isn't rubble, it's fingerprints. Number 7. Independence Picture. You're driving Highway 82, about 16 miles east of Aspen, climbing toward Independence Pass. The air gets thinner, the trees start looking smaller, and suddenly you're staring at a town that sits up around 10,900 feet, like it's daring winter to try something. This is Independence, and it's not abandoned in a normal way. This place didn't just slowly fade because nobody cared. It got humbled by altitude, weather, and a gold rush that burned hot and fast. It started with a classic boomtown spark. On July 4th, 1879, gold is found up here and people treat it like a sign. The name fits the mood: independence, freedom, new life. In no time, cabins go up, businesses pop open, and the whole place tries to act like it's going to be the next big thing. By 1882, you're talking around 1,000 people and something like 40 businesses. For a town that high up, that's wild. Imagine running a store, a saloon, a stable, all while snow can decide your schedule. But here's the catch. The gold was basically a shallow promise. The best years hit around 1881 and 1882, and then reality shows up. By August of 1882, the mines and the mill shut down. Meanwhile, Aspen is growing fast on silver, and suddenly independence isn't the dream anymore. It's the hard version of the dream, the colder, lonelier version. And the worse than you think moment is realizing this wasn't just a money problem, it was a survival problem. Life up here is constant cold, storms that don't care about your plans, and isolation that turns small issues into emergencies. When winter gets serious, the road stops being a road and starts being a wall. Now, listen to the detail that makes this town unforgettable. In 1899, there's a record snowfall. Supplies get cut off, people are running low, and they're stuck. So they do something that sounds like a movie scene until you remember it happened to real families. They build about 75 pairs of skis out of wood and literally ski their way out, down to Aspen. Not for fun, to get out. And at one point, they even turn it into a race with an entry fee that's almost funny in the darkest way: a ham sandwich. That's independence in one image. A town that had to invent an escape route. Today, you can still see the bones of it. Old log cabins, foundations, the outline of a place that tried to be permanent in a spot that never promised permanence. And standing there, you get this sinking feeling. This town didn't just lose people, it lost the argument with the mountain. And the next place on this list? It's abandoned for a completely different reason. Not because winter trapped it, but because something bigger decided it didn't get to exist anymore. Number 6, Capital City. Imagine building a town in the mountains and naming it Capital City, not Silver Camp, not Henson Creek. Capital City. Like you're already practicing how it's going to sound in history books. That's what makes this place so weird. Capital City wasn't just a mining town that got unlucky. It was a town built on a promise so big it almost feels delusional in hindsight. It started out as Galena, then in 1877 it got renamed because the founder George S. Lee had this dream that this remote little spot could become the capital of Colorado. And he didn't just say it, he tried to stage it. Capital City sits out near Lake City on the Alpine Loop, up around 9,700 feet. It's beautiful, but it's isolated in that way that makes you wonder how anyone thought this would become the center of anything. And that's where the worse than you think begins, because the town wasn't trying to survive. It was trying to impress. At its peak, the town site was laid out like it had a future. Around 200 acres, a real grid, real ambition. The population is described at roughly 800 people in its best days, which is enough for it to feel like a legit place. There was a hotel, saloons, a school, and a post office that ran from 1877 all the way to 1920. That detail matters because it shows this wasn't a one summer camp. It held on for decades, even while the dream was leaking out. Now here's the signature detail that feels like a movie prop. Lee built himself this fancy brick house that people later called a governor's mansion. And it wasn't just a nice cabin. Sources describe a parlor, guest rooms, even a little theater with an orchestra pit and a ballroom. A ballroom. Up here. That's not normal. I'm a minor energy. That's I'm expecting important people to show up in suits energy. To me, that house explains the whole collapse. Capital City wasn't just chasing ore, it was selling a story. The ballroom and the theater were basically proof of concept. Look, we're civilized. We're ready. Make this the center. But when mining money gets shaky, a town built on image collapses faster than a town built on necessity. Once silver prices crashed in the 1890s and once transport and lawsuits and all the messy realities kicked in, the story couldn't carry the place anymore. It had no backbone. And today, the abandonment is almost clean. You don't get a dramatic row of ruined buildings. You get two lonely survivors, the old U.S. Post Office and Lee's smelter stack. That's it, a government building and an industrial chimney standing like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence. Capital City feels abandoned because it wasn't just a town that died. It was a dream that got caught pretending it was already real. And the next place on this list, it's not going to be about ambition at all. It's going to be about a town that vanished for a reason you can't argue with, even if you hate it. Number 5, Ashcroft Drive, just a little way out of Aspen, up Castle Creek Road, and you get this strange feeling like you took a wrong turn into someone else's timeline. Because Aspen is all money, traffic, ski culture, and shiny storefronts. And then, not far from that, you end up at Ashcroft, where the loudest thing is the wind and the trees. That contrast is the hook. How does a place die right next to a place that never seems to stop growing? Ashcroft didn't start as some tiny camp that never mattered. It had real energy, real momentum. At one point, it had its own papers, a school, and enough saloons that you can tell people weren't just working here, they were trying to live here. This was the kind of town where you could imagine somebody saying, "We're building a future," and actually believing it. But the worse than you think part with Ashcroft is how fast that future can evaporate when the world decides to move around you. Here's what I mean. Towns like this don't only survive on ore in the ground, they survive on being useful, being the place people pass through, the place supplies get bought, news gets traded, deals get made. Ashcroft had that for a minute. It was in the right spot, it had a role, and it looked like it could keep going. Then the math changed. When the mining reality didn't match the early excitement, people started looking elsewhere. And when transportation patterns shifted toward Aspen, Ashcroft lost the one thing that keeps a remote town alive. The reason for anyone to stop, not visit. Stop, live, spend money, raise kids, keep the lights on. And that's where Ashcroft becomes different from most ghost towns. Most places get abandoned and left to rot. Ashcroft got taken apart. Think about how desperate and practical that is. If you're leaving and you've got a cabin you built with your own hands, you don't just walk away and let it collapse. You haul what you can, you salvage, you reuse. People moved on to Aspen, and in some cases, they literally took pieces of Ashcroft with them. That detail changes the whole vibe. This wasn't just a town that died. This was a town that got stripped for parts. So when you stand there today, what you're seeing isn't just decay. You're seeing what's left after the useful parts were removed. A few old buildings that survived, foundations that hint at a busier street, and a quietness that feels almost intentional. And just when you think, okay, it died and that's the end, Ashcroft has another twist. Years later, people tried to reimagine it. like it could be something new, something recreational, a second life. But that too didn't fully stick, so you're left with this place that didn't just get abandoned once. It got abandoned, then almost revived, then abandoned again. Ashcroft is a reminder that sometimes a town doesn't collapse with a bang, sometimes it collapses like a detour that stops being necessary. And when that happens, even your house might not stay behind. Number 4, Dearfield. Out on the plains in northeastern Colorado, there's a kind of silence you don't get in the mountains. No dramatic cliffs, no echoing canyons, just flat land, big sky, and wind that never seems to stop moving. And right in the middle of that, you can find Dearfield, a place that feels abandoned in a way that's almost too human to be just history. Because Dearfield wasn't built around a mine or a railroad hustle. It wasn't a boomtown trying to cash in and move on. It was a bet on something quieter: land, work, and community. The idea was simple and powerful. If you could own your own ground, you could build your own future. You could raise families, build a town, and stop having to ask permission to exist. And for a while it worked. At its peak, Dearfield wasn't just a couple of cabins. It had enough people that it felt like a real place, not a campsite. Enough families that you can picture routines, school mornings, Sunday gatherings, neighbors borrowing tools, kids running around when the day finally cooled off. Some accounts put the population in the hundreds, with the best years reaching up toward that small town scale where everyone knows everyone. But here's the part that makes Dearfield worse than you think. When a mining town collapses, people shrug and say, "The ore ran out." When a place like this collapses, it feels like the rules of the game change mid-play. Dearfield's whole life depended on 3 things staying stable: the weather, the water, and the money. You can work hard, but you can't negotiate with drought. You can plan for next season, but you can't control an economy that suddenly tightens and stops forgiving mistakes. When the larger economy crashed and the plains got hit with harsh dry years, a small farming community like this didn't just get stressed, it got squeezed from both sides. Crops struggle, income drops, credit disappears, and the "we'll push through" mentality starts to crack. So the town didn't explode. It didn't burn in one night. It didn't disappear into a lake. It thinned out. One family leaves, then another. Then the buildings that once held voices start holding only wind. And the plains make that emptiness feel even bigger, because there's nothing to hide it. A cabin sitting alone out there doesn't look romantic. It looks exposed. That's what hits you when you see the remaining structures. Weathered wood, faded walls, the kind of small buildings that were never meant to last forever, but were meant to last long enough. Long enough for kids to grow up. Long enough for a community to become normal. And instead, they became reminders. To me, Dearfield is one of the most unsettling kinds of abandoned America, because it isn't about greed or recklessness. It's about people trying to do everything right, and still losing when the world around them turns harsh. It's not just a town that got left behind. It's a promise that couldn't survive the pressure. And the next place on this list? It's abandoned for a totally different reason. Less about the plains breaking a community, and more about a community that was swallowed by something faster, colder, and more final. Number 3, Animas Forks. If you've never been above 11,000 feet, it's hard to explain how different the world feels up there. The air is thinner, the sun hits harder, and everything looks like it's operating on borrowed time. That's exactly the vibe you get when you reach Animas Forks. This place sits way up on the Alpine Loop, not far from Silverton, and it feels like a town that tried to live in a location that was never meant for year-round life. And that's what makes it worse than you think. It wasn't just abandoned because the money ran out, it was abandoned because winter kept proving over and over that people didn't really belong here. At first, Animas Forks actually grew fast. In the 1870s, cabins started going up, and within a few years you had a real little town forming. By the early 1880s, it had hundreds of people, businesses, and that were going to make this work energy you see in mining towns. You can still feel it in what's left. Not just random shacks, but actual structures that tell you families lived here. There's that iconic house with the bay windows, like somebody wanted a nice living room view in the middle of nowhere. There's a tiny jail. There are clusters of old buildings that make you realize this wasn't just men digging holes in the ground. This was a community trying to pretend it was normal. And then winter shows up. Here's a detail that always gets me. There was a year when a snowstorm basically trapped the town for weeks. Snow piled up so deep that people had to move around in ways that don't even sound real, like carving paths, just to get from one building to another. That's not cute mountain weather. That's your town turning into a cage. So what did people do? They adapted in a way that tells you everything. A lot of residents didn't even stay all year. When the cold hit, they'd drop down to lower ground, often to Silverton, and come back when it was livable again. And that's the problem. A town that disappears every winter doesn't build deep roots. It builds a habit of leaving. Then you add the rest of the pressure. Mining is already a gamble. Prices change, equipment breaks, profits get tighter. There were setbacks, including destructive events that knocked buildings out. And even when the area had short bursts of renewed activity in the early 1900s, it never became stable. It was more like the town kept getting a second chance, and then failing the test again. Eventually, the most revealing thing happened. Parts of the operation and machinery got pulled out and taken away. That's the moment a place stops being struggling and becomes finished. It's not just quiet, it's been emptied on purpose. Animas Forks is the kind of abandoned America that feels like it was worn down, not snapped in half. People didn't wake up one day and leave. They left a little each winter, then a little more, until one spring they just didn't bother coming back. And once you've stood up there and felt how harsh that air is, you understand why. Number 2. St. Elmo. If you've ever wanted to see a ghost town that doesn't look like it collapsed, St. Elmo is the one. This place doesn't feel like it fell apart. It feels like somebody paused it. You roll into the Chalk Creek Canyon area and the first thing you notice is how intact it looks. There's a main stretch of old wooden buildings that still stand in a way that messes with your head. Because when the shape is still there, your brain fills in the missing sound. You start imagining doors swinging open, boots on boards, a wagon creaking by, somebody yelling from a storefront, and then you remember, none of that is happening. It's just quiet. That's the hook with St. Elmo. It's abandoned. But it doesn't look dead in the obvious way. It looks like it's waiting. Back when this town was booming, it wasn't small. It hit a peak around the kind of number that turns a settlement into a real town. Roughly 2,000 people. That means families, businesses, routines. It means this wasn't just a handful of miners sleeping in shacks. This was a place that expected to last. But here's what I think really killed St. Elmo. And it's not a simple, the mine ran out story. St. Elmo lived because it had a lifeline. In the mountains, your lifeline is always transportation. Getting people in, getting supplies in, getting ore out. And for a while, St. Elmo had that. It was plugged into the system. Then the system started letting go. First, the town takes hits that weaken its center, including a major fire in the late 1800s that damaged the business heart of the place. Even if buildings get rebuilt, that kind of event changes momentum. It shakes confidence. It makes people hesitate about putting more money into a town that's already fighting altitude and brutal winters. And that's the second pressure that never stops: location. St. Elmo sits close to 10,000 feet. That means long winters, heavy snow, and a constant feeling that nature is the landlord and you're just renting time. But the real turning point is when rail service through the high country fades and finally stops. Think about what that means in real life. It's not just fewer trains. It's fewer jobs, fewer deliveries, fewer reasons for anyone to stay open, invest, or raise a family there. It's like a town getting unplugged. When the lifeline goes, the town can still stand physically, but it starts dying socially. That's why St. Elmo doesn't look like rubble. It looks like a place that ran out of oxygen before it ran out of walls. And what makes it even stranger is that it didn't go completely empty overnight. For a long time, the town had this last caretaker energy, like a few people were still hanging on after almost everyone else left. That detail matters because it makes the abandonment feel personal, not just historical. Saint. Elmo is a reminder that a town can be erased without being destroyed. Sometimes it's not a disaster that ends it. Sometimes it's the moment the world stops needing it. Number 1, Gilman. You know a place is different when it's not just abandoned, it's off limits. That's Gilman. This town is still sitting there, on the mountainside. In Colorado, like it's frozen in midlife. You can see rows of buildings and the shape of a real community, not just a couple of broken cabins. And that's what messes with you, because it doesn't look like a town that naturally faded. It looks like a town that got shut down. Gilman was a company town. Everything about it depended on one engine, the mine. When that engine was running, the town made sense. People had jobs, kids had schools, stores had customers, and daily life had a rhythm. But when the mine closed in 1984, it wasn't like a slow decline where people had time to adjust. The air got pulled out of the room. Workers left fast, and the town basically emptied like somebody hit an emergency switch. And here's the part that takes Gilman from sad to worse than you think. The story didn't end when the people left. It kept going underground. Literally. The mining complex connected to this area wasn't small. The underground working stretched for something like 70 miles of tunnels. 70. That's a whole hidden world under the hills. And Gilman was the neighborhood built above it. When you hear that, you stop thinking of this as a random ghost town and start thinking of it as the surface layer of a massive industrial machine. Then you look at the next number and it gets colder. The contaminated site tied to the old mine covers around 235 acres and includes the town. That's not one bad building. That's a whole zone. It tells you the problem wasn't just unemployment or empty houses. It was the kind of long-term mess that turns a place into a managed risk. And that's why Gilman feels sealed. It's not like other ghost towns where you can wander around and imagine living there again if you just fixed things up. Here, the idea of going back doesn't even feel like a normal option. Not because it's haunted in the Hollywood way, but because it's the kind of place where the land itself became part of the story. To me, that's what makes Gilman the perfect number 1. Most abandoned towns on this list feel like they lost a fight. Gilman feels like it got removed from the fight entirely, like it got reclassified. A living town turned into a problem that has to be monitored, and the creepiest part is how ordinary it still looks from a distance. A town with streets, structures, and the shape of daily life, just sitting there, but no longer belonging to daily life. So here's the question I can't shake. When a place is still standing, still visible, still right there in front of you, but people aren't allowed to return the way they used to, is that abandoned? Or is it something even more final? Colorado looks beautiful on a map, but after everything you just saw, I think we can all feel the same hard truth. A lot of places don't disappear because of one big explosion. They disappear because the reason to stay gets pulled away piece by piece. Some towns get broken by winter, some get inflated by ambition and then deflate. Some get bypassed when the system chooses a different route, and some get sealed off like a final period. And that's what's worse than you think. Abandonment isn't just empty buildings, it's memories, jobs, and entire communities getting switched off. If you've ever driven past any of the places on this list, drop a comment and tell us what it felt like in real life. Which town was the creepiest to you? And which one hit you the hardest? And if you want an Abandoned America Part 2 in another state, comment the state you want next. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss what comes next.